Hey, so welcome everybody. It's really a great pleasure to be able to introduce the first of the Circus talks this year. I'm David Parks. I'm the area dean in computer science, and we really think of Circus as being a very integral part of what we do. It's one of the most visible outward-facing parts of our scholarship here, and excited to have another year. And in part that means we have some new exciting fellows around as well. So let me introduce our first speaker. Feng received her PhD from USC, where she was advised by Tambe. And she will join the faculty of the Institute for Software Research in the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon in the fall of 2017, so a year from now. So we have you here for a year, which we're very excited about. Her research is in artificial intelligence and multi-agent systems. She focuses on real-world challenges with societal impact. I wanted to mention a couple of awards, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what she does. Her work has won the Deployed Application Award at the Innovative Applications of AI Conference, and the Outstanding Paper Award in the Computational Sustainability track at IJK 15. So she works generally on ways in which AI and also game theory come together, and you can broadly think about the topic as that of security games. And her work, quite remarkably, has been applied in some high-impact places. It's been used by the US Coast Guard for protecting the Staten Island Ferry, and it's being used for tiger conservation in Southeast Asia. She's collaborated with researchers in many different areas, so I'm sure she'll find this to be an exciting place to be, and I encourage you to look her up and have a conversation. And today she's going to be talking about empowering the defender with unpredictability. So welcome, Faye. It's great to have you here this year.
Thank you, David. So thank you, David, for the introduction, and thank you all for attending this talk. And it's my great honor to give the first Circus seminar talk this semester. And as David said, my research aims to address real-world challenges in security and sustainability domains. And towards that vision, I explore areas in artificial intelligence and especially computational game theory with connections to machine learning and optimization. So security is definitely a very significant challenge in the world today, and is a big concern of the whole society, as can be seen from the recent attacks in Europe. And one important question being asked is, how can we increase security? And this is one question that motivates my research. For example, how can we help improve the way of protecting critical infrastructure? And in addition to security, sustainability is another serious problem that motivates my research. For example, today there are only about 3,200 tigers left on the planet, which is about 1/20th of the population 100 years ago. And the population drop of such key species can cause a big problem to the whole ecosystem. And poaching is considered to be one of the major drives of the population drop. And then the question is, how can we help save wildlife from poaching? And indeed, security and sustainability challenges exist all around the world. And we have to protect airports, transportation networks, and cyber systems. And we have to protect environmental resources, save endangered wildlife, and stop illegal fishing. And the unifying theme under all these challenges is the strategic interaction between the law enforcement agencies and their opponents, like the attackers or the poachers. And that's where game theory can be applied. So here is a very simple example abstracting a scenario in the infrastructure security domain. So let's say there are two targets, which could be two terminals at an airport. And in this game, there are two players. The first player is the defender, who has limited defensive resources that he can choose to only protect one of the targets every day. And the attacker, the second player, can choose to attack one of the targets. And the numbers in this table showing the payoff values for the players, where green is for the defender and red for the attacker. So clearly, when the defender is protecting target 1, when the attacker attacks target 1, then the defender can successfully defend the attack and get a positive reward of 5, where the adversary gets a penalty of 3. But on the other hand, if when the attack happens, the defender is actually protecting target 2, then the defender will get a penalty of 5, while the attacker gets a reward of 4. So actually, the players do not move simultaneously. Before an attack, the adversary will conduct a long-term surveillance, trying to figure out how the defender do the patrols, and then decide which target to attack. That means if the defender always protecting target 2 on Mondays, for example, then this can be easily exploited by the attacker, and then the attacker would just go to attack target 1 on Monday, and then he will succeed for sure. So it is important for the defender to randomize and keep the adversary guessing. So for example, the defender can choose a mixed strategy, say protecting target 1 with probability 0.6 and protecting target 2 with probability 0.4. And the adversary may still conduct a surveillance and observe this kind of probability distribution over the targets, but he will not know exactly which target will be protected in a particular day. So these probabilities making it much harder for the attacker to plan an attack and succeed. And this kind of game is called the Stackelberg security game. And the task for us is then to compute what is the optimal strategy for the defender, or what is the optimal way to randomize. And these ideas have been used to address real-world challenges, security challenges, basically. And clearly, the scale of the real-world problem is much larger, and the settings can be much more complex. So models and algorithms have been proposed to handle these real-world situations and compute the defender strategy efficiently, forming the first generation of security game research. And some of the work has been successfully deployed in the real world for protecting airports, ports, and flights. Despite the success, most of the work in the first generation of security games have some standard assumptions. For example, the targets are stationary, like the terminals at an airport, and the attacker is perfectly rational, meaning they are expected utility maximizers, and it's a one-shot game, meaning the attacker plans an attack, and then that's the end of the game. But there are many domains in the real world that go beyond these simple assumptions. And this is where my contributions are. So my work advances the state of art of security games and handle to a new generation of security games and handle massive games with complex spatial-temporal aspects, and as well as human behavior models. And more specifically, my research has explored two important topics in security games. The first topic is to handle spatial-temporal continuities or dynamics, for example, the continuity in time and space when we consider a moving target. And the second topic is to analyze the human behavior as a human adversaries may not be perfectly rational in many cases. And I have been very fortunate to have worked on different domains, including protecting ferry systems, fisheries, wildlife, road networks. And I've also worked with human subjects to learn behavior models. And along the way, I have collaborated with researchers and practitioners from all different disciplines, including operations research, psychology, ecology, and criminology and economics. And my work touches both theory side and application, and has led to 2 applications that have been deployed in the real world, including one that is used by the US Coast Guard for protecting the Staten Island Ferry, and another used for wildlife conservation in Malaysia. So in this talk, I would like to highlight some of my work in dealing with spatial-temporal dynamics, covering 3 main contributions. And there are others, for example, working with human subjects and learn the behavior models that I will only be able to introduce very briefly towards the end of the talk. So the first contribution, which is dealing with continuous time and space in security games, is motivated by the problem of protecting moving targets, for example, the Staten Island Ferry in New York. So has anyone here been on Staten Island Ferry? Oh, great. So as you may know, that the Staten Island Ferry provides a crucial link between Manhattan and Staten Island, and it carries roughly 60,000 passengers per day on weekdays, which makes it a very important transportation way of transportation, and also can be an attractive target to the attackers. So the ferries may present to the attackers as an important target, and the attackers may ram a suicide boat packed with explosives and ram into the ferry, which has happened previously on French supertanker Limburg and USS Cole. So to prevent this kind of potential attacks, the U.S. Coast Guard have some small, faster patrol boats, as seen in the blue circle here, to protect the ferries. And let's take a closer look. These patrol boats are equipped with machine guns, and they can stop the attack within a certain distance. So, however, there are many ferries running at the same time, and the U.S. Coast Guard do not have enough number of patrol boats. So therefore, they cannot protect everything all the time. And what they used to do is that they would randomly choose one of the ferries and then ask the patrol boats to follow along the ferry all along the way, and leaving the others unprotected. Well, clearly buying more patrol boats can be an easy solution to increase protection, but it will be a huge investment. Actually, just buying a boat would cost roughly close to $1 million. So the U.S. Coast Guard came to us and asked us, is there a way to maximize the use of the limited patrol boats? And we came up with a game-theoretic solution. And the solution is actually deployed since April 2013. And as shown in this video, which is taken on the Staten Island Ferry, the patrol boat is actually taking U-turns and trying to, so it's no longer moving in one direction steadily as they've done this, as what they've been doing before. And prior to our work, that kind of pattern has never happened. And so our solution has changed their maneuver of conducting patrols. And indeed, the solution we provide is a randomized patrol strategy. And here is a pair of patrol routes that are sampled from this randomized strategy. So each of the patrol boats may start from one of the terminals, and they start following different ferries and making U-turns and changing speed to follow different ferries. And this is just one sample, and the game-theoretic solution, and there can be other sample routes from the solution. And this solution makes the movement of the patrol boats more unpredictable and more dynamic, and makes it harder for the attacker to plan an attack. So now we know that there is a real problem of protecting moving targets, and I've shown a snapshot of our solution. And next, I will introduce what makes the problem difficult and how we how we get the solution. So the goal here is to optimize the use of the patrol boats. And in this problem, the targets are moving with a fixed daily schedule that is known to the public. And in addition, the attackers may attack at any time in the continuous timeline. And these key features makes it unnecessary to reason about the continuous time, which is never considered in previous work in security games. So this continuity in time leads to new challenges when we model the problem as a game. First of all, there can be infinite number of attacker actions, because now the attacker not only needs to decide which target to attack, but also when to attack. Due to the continuous timeline, we will get a game matrix with infinite columns. Each column corresponds to one possible time and target. And the second challenge is that there will be infinite number of defender actions as well. So for ease of presentation, I will focus on one defender resource case. So the defender needs to choose one patrol route. So he can just move from one terminal all the way to the other, or just go to the middle of the water and come back, or just move it back and forth. And basically, there can be infinite number of such patrol routes. And as a result, in our game matrix, we'll have infinite number of rows. Each corresponds to one patrol route. So what further complicates the problem is the payoff values for the players, which is also changing over time. So the attacker's payoff can be viewed in two different scenarios. The first scenario is when the attack happens, the target is not protected by the patroller, in which case the attacker would succeed in this attack. And we call this reward as the target utility, and this may change over time. For example, in the ferry domain, when the ferry is closer to the terminals, a successful attack may cause higher damage, because the people who are waiting on the terminals may also be affected. And when it's moving to the middle of the water, the target utility may drop a bit. So, and on the other hand, if the patroller is close enough to the ferry when the attack happens, then he can successfully stop the attack, and in which case the attacker will get nothing. So, and in this talk, I will focus on zero-sum games, meaning that which means the gain of the attacker is just the loss of the defender. And the proposed approach can also be generalized to non-zero-sum, general-sum settings. So given all these challenges, what we need to do is that we need to find the optimal defender strategy, which is a probability distribution over all possible patrol routes. Say, one possible strategy could be taking the purple route with probability 0.3 and orange route with probability 0.4 and so on and so forth. And in a zero-sum game, the optimal defender strategy is clearly the minimax strategy, which means we want to minimize the attacker's expected utility when the attacker best responds. So the attacker's expected utility is basically the attacker's gain in expectation and can be calculated as the target utility multiplied by the probability he can succeed. And best response means that the attacker will choose the target and time that leads to the highest expected utility for him. And for the defender, on the other hand, he wants to minimize this maximum value. So any questions so far? OK. So next, I will explain how we find the optimal defender strategy in 4 steps. And in the first step, we will focus on the defender side. And the key idea in my solution is using a compact representation for the defender strategy. So in this step, I will consider discretized actions for both players. And I will address infinite action set in later steps. So for now, let's assume that the whole timeline is divided into a set of discretized time points, and the line over which the target is moving is also discretized into a set of locations, say A and B and C. Then we can get this graph, and each node here is a time-location pair. So assuming the attacker, and we assume that the attacker will only attack at the discretized time points and locations. For example, when the attacker, when the ferry is moving from location C to B to A, then the attacker may attack at location B at 10 minutes or at location A at 20 minutes. Well, clearly this is a very strong assumption, and we will relax it later. So we also assume that the defender can choose a patrol route that is on this graph, where the edges indicates the feasible movements for the patroller. And for example, the patroller can just move from location B to C and back to B, or he can take other routes as well. And then a defender strategy would be a probability distribution over all these possible routes, which is in total we have n to the power of t patrol routes, where n is the number of discretized locations and t is the number of discretized time points. So the optimal defender strategy in this so-called full representation can be solved using previous approach, which is a linear program. So as shown here, so basically the decision variables is the probabilities of taking each of the routes. And the key constraint here is saying that the attacker can attack any target at any time, but he would choose the one that gives him the highest expected utility. And this approach, however, cannot scale up because of this exponential number of variables. Therefore, to overcome this limitation, I used a compact representation for the defender strategy. So instead of focusing on the routes, I focus on edges and represent the marginal probabilities flowing over each edge of the graph. For example, we can combine these two segments and represent it as taking this edge with probability 0.3. And similarly, I can combine these two segments and represent it as taking this edge with probability 0.7. So in this way, to represent a defender strategy, we only need n squared t numbers or variables, because there are at most n squared t edges in this graph. So it's much more efficient for compared to the full representation. And I was able to prove that that the compact representation does not lead to any loss in solution quality for the defender. And this is how we reduce the number of variables to be considered on the defender side from n to the power of t to n squared t. So in the next step, we will focus on the attacker side and to try to see how we can use a compact representation for the attacker's infinite action set over time. So notice that it is impossible to force the attacker to only attack at 10 minutes or 20 minutes. They can essentially they can attack at any time they want. For example, at 9 minutes here. And in my solution, I handled this problem by partitioning the attacker's action set. And with this partition, what we notice in the end is that even the attacker can attack at any time along the continuous timeline. We will only need to reason about a finite few number of actions because that's the best for the attacker. And I will explain how to make the partition with a simple example. So assume a target is moving from Manhattan to Staten Island, and the patroller is moving on the opposite direction. And clearly, at the beginning, at this time point, the patroller is not protecting the target. And as they start moving, they will get closer until this time point where the target, the ferry, is about to enter the protection range of the patroller. And as they continue moving, the target keep being protected until this time point where it leaves the protection range of the patroller. And after this time point, theta 2, the target is no longer protected by the defender. So we notice that this theta 1 and theta 2 are some critical time points when the protection status of the target change. And these points are the basis of our partition. So similarly, on our time location graph, we can, if the ferry is moving from location C to B and patroller is moving from B to C, then we can easily identify these theta 1 and theta 2 along the timeline based on the protection radius of the patroller. And theta 1 and theta 2 actually divides the timeline between 0 minute and 10 minute into 3 zones. And recall that the attacker's expected utility is actually the target utility multiplied by the probability of success. And we can observe that in each zone, the probability of success keeps the same. For example, in the first green zone, clearly, any time in the green zone, the target is not protected by the patroller at all. And however, in the yellow zone, the target is always being protected by the patroller. So although the target utility does change, but there is only one best point that we need to consider in each zone. For example, So for example, if this is a target utility curve, then clearly in the green zone, we only need to consider this time point because we know that the probability of success is always fixed number, while the target utility is changing, and that's kind of the only time point that we need to consider. So actually, the only assumption we have on these target utility functions is that we can find these best time points easily. So of course, a real problem is much more complex as there are other ferries moving at the same time, and the patrollers can take different edges with different probabilities. And all these just leads to a larger number of zones that we need to consider. But the key observation is the same. That is, the probability of success is a fixed number in each zone, and we only need to reason about one time point in each zone. So this way, we can represent the attacker's strategy compactly. And I was able to prove that using this compact representation for attacker does not lead to any loss in the solution quality when the attacker best responds. So basically, we are reducing the number of actions that we need to consider for the attacker side from infinity to a polynomial scale. Yeah?
You only have edges going in one time interval between adjacent points in your discretization, like from A to B or B to C, but not A to C in one.
Oh yeah, that's possible. That's all decided by the speed limit of the patroller. So it is possible that you can move from A to C directly.
Okay.
Yeah. So with these two steps, we were able to handle both players' action sets efficiently, and I have taken 2 additional steps to complete my solution. I'll skip the details of these 2 steps, but just want to give a very high-level overview. So in the third step, we consider the infinite defender action set over the continuous time and check how much the defender loses by discretizing his action space. And in the last step, we focus on the equilibrium refinement and which we aim to find a defender strategy that is not only optimal when the attacker best responds, but also robust when the attacker deviates from the best response. So for the evaluation of my algorithm, the question we are asking is whether or not we have optimized our patrol resources, and I tested on randomly chosen utility functions within range 0 to 10, and we show the results here in terms of the attacker's expected utility. And clearly a lower value means it's better for the defender. So the yellow bar shows when the previous shows the result when we are using the previous US Coast Guard strategy, where the patrol is moving along with one target all along the way. And the red bar shows the game-theoretic solution leads to a much better expected utility for the defender. So actually, the attacker's expected utility is cut down by half by using this game-theoretic solution with the same number of patrol resources. And as our work has been brought to the real world, it has resulted in a radical shift in the patrolling maneuver or tactics of the US Coast Guard. And the feedback to us is very positive, and they really love this mathematically backed new way of patrolling. So they call this shift as from point defense to zone defense as an analogy to the basketball game. And they think our solution has improved the randomness of the patrols, and also it increases the dynamics. So when they also check the vulnerability of the patrols from like a mock attacker perspective, and found it's harder for the attacker to plan an attack. And they noted the real patrollers, the one who are controlling the vehicles, came back to us saying that they found it is more the new way of patrolling is more dynamic, as they need to change speed from time to time and make U-turns. And professional mariners also observed there is an apparent increase in the U.S. Coast Guard patrols, although they didn't increase any number of patrol boats. So, yeah.
So we know that people are really, really bad at behaving randomly. So in practice, how do they implement the randomness? Like when the coast, just the boat come back and then is given some path to follow, or like, do you know how they do that? Yeah,
actually, how they do that is, so our algorithm predicts a few number of, let's say, a sequence of randomly generated patrol routes, and hand over to them. And every day they will pick one of the routes and then kind of convert the strategy into the language that they can tell. For example, they will say, okay, the first 5 minutes is, say, a short zone, which they mean it by a short U-turn, something like that. So they convert this patrol routes into their own languages and execute that patrol route. So yeah, clearly, the fact that it is being used by the US Coast Guard has shown some merit of this algorithm, because we are not powerful enough to force them to use it. And in addition, our work actually makes the patrols more visible to the passengers on the ferry and to the general public. And people report that they feel safe. And if you search for videos about Staten Island Ferry patrol on YouTube, you will find that every time the patrol boat makes a U-turn, the passengers start clapping and taking photos. And actually, in this June, I finally went on the Staten Island Ferry and taken a photo with the patrol boat myself. And I also extended the work to two-dimensional cases, which can apply to more complex ferry systems, like the ones in Seattle or San Francisco, where they have much more terminals. And the key ideas keeps the same, but the partition points will need to be solved in a three-dimensional space. So I have introduced my first contribution, which deals with the spatio-temporal continuity in the context of moving target protection. And in that problem, we are still assuming a one-shot attack, meaning and a best responding attacker. However, in my second contribution, I focus on domains where these assumptions do not hold, and in particular, I focus on green security domains, by which I mean the domains such as protecting wildlife from poaching, protecting forest from illegal fishing, illegal logging, and stop illegal fishing. So these are important domains for environmental sustainability, and same as infrastructure security domains, such as protecting airports and ports, the law enforcement agencies have very limited patrol resources, and the game theory can be brought into play. However, on these domains, there are some very key differences compared to the infrastructure security domains. First of all, there are frequent and repeated attacks. For example, the poachers will place this kind of snails on the ground, and whenever the animal steps on it, the animal will get trapped. And the poachers leave and come back again to place the snails. And they may do it like they make it for a living, so they do it very frequently. And officers told us that there more than 1,000 snails can be found in the conservation area in Uganda. So that means if we consider the problem as a game, it's no longer a one-shot game. And also, the frequent attacks actually brings in more attack data that can be exploited by the defender. And the second main difference is in the attacker's decision-making. Because the attacks takes place so frequently, the attackers do not have enough time to conduct long-term surveillance before each of their attacks and plan very carefully about which target is with the highest expected utility. That's just impossible for them. So therefore, it is more important to consider this kind of limited surveillance and bounded rationality on the attacker side, on the poacher side. And therefore, these kind of differences makes it necessary to have a new model to describe this kind of interactions. And that's where I introduced this green security games. So I would just want to highlight 3 important features of this green security game model. So the first novelty of this game model is that we use a multi-stage game to describe the strategic interaction. And let me describe this game along this timeline. So consider a wildlife conservation area that is divided into 9 regions. Then the defender first chooses a mixed strategy, which can be represented by a heat map, for example. And the more green it is, meaning that the defender will go to that region more frequently. And then the patroller will try to we'll try to sample from this mixed strategy a concrete patrol route as shown in the green line here and execute it. And at the same time, the poachers will decide where to place the snails, so as shown by the red cross there. And this can keep going for multiple weeks or months. And then after some time, the defender can choose to switch to a new defender strategy, for example, like this one, and then start sampling patrol routes from there. So as we can see here, now we are considering a multi-stage game where in each stage of the game, the defender can choose a mixed strategy. And the second novelty of this model is that it considers a population of bounded rational attackers with possibly delayed observation, so which can better fit the practice in these domains. And I will return to the bounded rationality part later, but now I want to elaborate more on the delayed observation part. So notice that the defender strategy is actually hidden from the poachers, meaning that the poacher may gain some information about the defender strategy through different various sources, for example, from their own experience of whether or not their snails being confiscated, or they may talk to local villagers. They will talk to other poachers trying to understand which places the patroller go more recently, more frequently in say recent times, and as a result, and all these kind of information sources leads to some delay in their observation, meaning that it may take them some time to fully understand what the defender is doing. And when the defender is switching from one defender strategy to the other, the poachers do not have this immediate update of this new strategy. They may still have the old impression that the patrollers went to this area more frequently than when they decide where to place the snail, when they make the decision at this time point. So that is the second key point here is that the attacker model should consider some delayed observation. And as a result, with these 2 features, the green security game model opens up new challenges in planning and learning, because now the defender can potentially benefit from deceptive planning. So he can deliberately patrol in this area in this area more frequently, and then he would expect that after some time, the poachers would observe that and try to place snails in other areas and circumvent this particular area. And as a result, the defender and this can be expected by the defender, so the defender could just place more resources to some other areas, assuming that the poachers has observed their old strategy. So I've proposed an algorithm that can plan for a sequence of defender strategies to be used across the stages, and I'll skip the details, but I would like to show the simulation results of the planning algorithms compared to the standard Stackelberg equilibrium strategy, which is used for a one-shot game and does not do any deceptive planning. So the red bar and the yellow bar shows the planning algorithms, which uses either look ahead or a cyclic sequence for deceptive planning, and the first one is the Stackelberg equilibrium strategy being used in every stage of the game, and the y-axis is the defender's expected utility over multiple stages, and clearly the new planning algorithm performs much better. And furthermore, for one of the proposed algorithm, I can provide the following bound for the solution quality of the defender strategy. And so now with this new model and the proposed planning algorithms, what we get in the end is a sequence of defender strategies in the form of heat maps. However, that's not the end of the story yet. And now let me turn to the real-world application of this green security game work, which is designing patrols for the patrollers to combat poaching. And while we got the heat maps, we faced new challenges in building the real-world application. And an important aspect is to deal with the spatial constraints. So this is a target site for deployment. And as we can see here, the terrain is quite complex, and the elevation change is not neglectable. So what does this mean? This means if we sample a patrol route from the heat map, it may look all good on the 2D map, but if you check the elevation, it's just impossible for the patroller to follow. So to understand how terrain really makes a difference for the patrols, our research team went to Malaysia and conducted a trial patrol together with our collaborators from NGOs to see how patrol really works. And this photo is taken before our 8-hour walking in the jungle. And this is me, my PhD advisor, and a former postdoc. And this is after the 5-hour walking. We are all exhausted, and our collaborators told us there are 500 meters to go. So during these patrols, we figured out that we really need to take into consideration the detailed topographical information. And in addition, ridge lines and streams are actually easier for people to walk along. So from this first-hand experience in the field, there is a major shift in our design or the representation for the patrol strategies. So we switch from a purely grid-based strategy to a more route-based strategy. So what we do is we focus on terrain features such as ridgelines and streams, and because the elevation change along these kind of terrain features is much more gentle than taking any other routes. And as a result, these places will have high animal traffic, and therefore poachers will focus on these terrain features, and so should the patroller focus on these features. So based on that, I propose a hierarchical modeling approach, which treats these terrain features as route segments and link them together to build a virtual street map of the whole area. So just a quick shot. So assuming this is a contour line of the conservation area. Is it clear to see? It's a bit hard to see, but anyway. So we first divide them into, say, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid cells, and then we identify the potential ridgelines and streams based on the elevation information. And from these terrain features, we kind of building a street map like a graph, linking together all these terrain features. And based on this street map, we can plan for a patrol route that is more compatible with the terrain. So if we show it on the Google Earth, we will see that this is like how the street map looks like, and when we patrol routes on this one, it is much easier to follow for the patrollers. And the result is like a probability distribution over this set of patrol routes. So the point I want to make here is that these challenges of the spatial constraints are brought by the real world, and it could have been sufficient for us to sit in the LA office and like prove theorems and saying that we are done. But once you go out to the field, you will find something that is new and unexpected. And it's something that you have to address when you want to bring this AI techniques to the field. So this is like one important aspect of my research kind of methodology is that you want to address real world challenges, then you need to really understand what the challenges are. So based on this work, I've developed this PAWS application with this nice acronym. It's not developed by me, but it's a nice one. It's Protection Assistant for Wildlife Security. So PAWS has been deployed in Malaysia and has won and this picture shows the patrollers conducting the patrols suggested by PAWS. And let's take a closer look of how the actual patrols look like. And here each grid is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. So at the beginning, when we use the simply grid-based thinking and suggest a route like this, the actual, the orange one is a suggested route, and the black one is the actual route taken by the patroller. So clearly, the patrollers cannot follow the suggested route, and they cannot even go back to the base camp shown in the green triangle. And with a new way of thinking, the generated patrol route is much easier to be followed by the patrollers, and it's more practical, indicating that now we are handling the constraints in the right way. And during these patrols, multiple animal signs and human activity signs have been found, which kind of indicating that PAWS has led the patrollers to the right directions. Well, clearly, at this point, the application has not deployed long enough, and there is no way for us to do kind of controlled experiments. So it is not very clear to really to know exactly how much benefit PAWS has bring. But we have some preliminary data that shows it is going at the right direction. So according to the data, PAWS patrols leads to a higher number of human activity signs and animal signs being found per kilometer of patrol. So, and in addition, PAWS leads the patrollers to places that they have never been to before, which we call the explorative PAWS patrols. And the number of signs being found during these explorative patrols is also high. So, so hopefully by now, I have delivered a brief introduction of my work in dealing with spatial-temporal aspects in security games, including continuity in time and space, repeated attacks, and complex spatial constraints. And there are 2 applications being built and have been deployed. And I have done work with attacker behavior analysis as well. And for that, I have worked on building models of how adversaries react to patrols and how to learn the models from data. So, for example, we designed a very simple online game abstracting the scenario in wildlife protection domain and asked the workers from Amazon Mechanical Turk to play the role as a poacher so they can move around to check the percentage of success and also the expected reward, the reward of success, which is indicated by the animal density here. And we collect data from there and trying to see we conducted experiments for multiple rounds and trying to see how the people are making decisions when they are faced with this task. And what we found is that clearly the players are not perfectly rational. They do all kinds of crazy things, but there is still some pattern that we can exploit. For example, if the player succeeds in one round, he would prefer to place snails in the exact same target or some similar targets in the next round. So we introduce the notion of vulnerability and attractiveness of the targets and take these things into account when we build a behavioral model of the poachers. And I have worked on other domains, including, say, protecting forest from protecting forest by preventing fieldwood extraction. And in this case, we are mainly focused on the theoretical side and trying to see that what would be the best way to distribute the whole a fixed amount of patrol effort so that we can stop the we can kind of maximize the pristine area, which means the area that has been never touched by the extractors who are living on the perimeter of the forest and trying to trespass the whole forest and trying to extract fieldwoods. And the optimal strategy we found here is that the defender should give up the outer rim of the forest and making it a buffer zone, so no patrol at all. And at some point here, we start with a donut-shaped patrolling. That is, we have a higher patrol density at the outer range of the band and the lower density at the inner side of the band, and making the marginal expected benefit exactly equal the marginal cost for the patroller, so that for the fieldwood extractor, so that the extractors have no incentive to moving forward. But this is like a snapshot, and it's an initial step towards addressing this challenge. And actually, I believe that in the next few years, there will be a big rise in advancing AI techniques to address societal challenges. And my work on computational game theory has made a difference, and I will continue my work that focuses on integrating machine learning and game theory and makes an impact in the real world, especially addressing challenges in security and sustainability domains. So for example, game theory and machine learning can play a more important role in wildlife protection. So I plan to work on fundamental problems that arise from the dynamic interaction in the presence of data. Because, for example, the rangers and poachers can collect information about the field and also about the other players' actions through their surveillance, through static sensors, or through UAVs that can provide real-time information. And their decision-making will highly depend on their collected data. And this picture actually shows a camera trap that is installed on the tree so that it can take a photo of the animal or human being when they walk by. So clearly there are a lot of challenges to be addressed here though, because we have to deal with the sparsity of the data and a lot of uncertainties in the data too. For example, if the patroller went to a patrol and observed nothing in a particular area, it does not necessarily mean that there is no poaching happening at all. It may just means that it's harder for the patroller to observe something in that area. So that's why you didn't observe anything. And I would like to kind of answer the questions of how to model these factors and how to compute the best strategy for the defender considering these factors. And also, it is possible to use machine learning and game theory to address cybersecurity challenges. And clearly, in protecting cyber assets, there is an important difference is that now we have a third player, which is the users in the users. So we have the defender, we have the attacker, and we have the users who also may take some strategic actions. Making it much more difficult and complicated to be addressed. And of course, the integration of game theory and machine learning can clearly go beyond the defender-attacker settings and address challenges that in richer domains. For example, with the prevalence of ride-sharing and bike-sharing apps, real-time data is available in these domains with a large number of strategic players. And how to make use of the real-time data collected and design pricing schemes that can incentivize the players in the system to achieve certain goals. This will be another direction of my future work. So thank you all, and I'm happy to take questions.